Tonight we begin with a defection that NATO intelligence officials had feared, anticipated, and quietly prepared for. A defection that unfolded not over months of negotiation but in 72 hours. 72 hours that shattered the Kremlin's operational security. 72 hours that exposed Putin's entire war strategy. 72 hours that changed the trajectory of this conflict. What one senior Russian general did this week crossed a line that Vladimir Putin had hoped would hold through fear alone. And when that line broke, NATO did not hesitate. They responded with speed, precision, and overwhelming coordination. For months now, there had been whispers, not official intelligence briefings, not formal diplomatic cables, just whispers, to that senior figures inside Putin's military command were preparing something unprecedented. Putin has been paranoid, yes, but he has been methodical in his paranoia. His moves have followed a certain logic, a rhythm, almost a predictability. But what set off alarm bells in Langley and Brussels this month was that the rhythm went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian military communications know the indicators. The encrypted transmissions between command posts, the movements of senior officers, the rotation of personal security details, the sudden reassignment of trusted aides, all of that went quiet around one particular general, and whenever a Russian senior commander goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday morning, NATO intelligence detected what they described as an unscheduled border crossing in a Baltic corridor, including diplomatic vehicle movements that had not been activated in over 18 months. These are the kinds of extraction protocols that Western intelligence only deploys when they are handling something very specific, a high-value defector, a critical asset, or an emergency exfiltration. Analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once, but what they did know was that someone inside Putin's inner military circle was changing sides, and when a senior Russian general shifts allegiance without warning, even by the smallest signal, every intelligence agency on the planet pays attention. The statement issued by NATO command tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not symbolic, it was urgent. Source after source inside the Pentagon described the defectors' intelligence as comprehensive, current, and perhaps most importantly, operationally devastating to the Kremlin, but defections only matter if the intelligence is actionable. This intelligence was, in fact, what this general delivered is among the most significant intelligence breakthroughs we've seen in modern warfare. Here's what we know. Within 48 hours of his arrival at a NATO facility, Allied commanders began repositioning assets across 3 theaters. These weren't routine adjustments. These were strategic redeployments, the kinds of moves that NATO only executes when they are preparing to neutralize an imminent threat. Tonight, senior defense officials confirmed that the defecting general delivered 34 battle plans to NATO intelligence, including offensive operations that had recently been approved by Putin himself for what analysts believe was a spring escalation campaign. NATO moved before Russia could adapt. They repositioned air defense systems. They reinforced forward operating bases. They alerted rapid response units that were likely targeted in those very plans. In other words, NATO targeted the operational architecture of Putin's next move, the infrastructure that would have made his strategy viable. This is what made the defection so devastating. Putin's battle plans weren't just theoretical, they were actionable. They represented the kind of coordinated offensive that could have overwhelmed Ukrainian defenses if left unchecked. And NATO, understanding that fully, responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't broadcast their moves publicly. They didn't engage in rhetorical escalation. They neutralized the threat before it could materialize. They secured their positions before Putin could adapt. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence officials now believe that Putin's spring offensive was designed to test the cohesion of NATO after months of political uncertainty in Washington. Putin wanted to see whether the alliance would fragment under pressure, but instead the opposite happened. NATO didn't fracture. They coordinated a response that was so swift, so unified that even Moscow noticed. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily, but this week, NATO did. Defense analysts speaking with multiple outlets under anonymity described Putin's position as compromised, a term rarely used to describe a nuclear power's strategic posture, but NATO proved this week that they remain both vigilant and adaptive. Their response was not only immediate, it was calibrated so precisely that Russian command reportedly delayed 3 planned operations within 72 hours. That delay matters because it shows that Putin's generals no longer trust their own operational security. It shows that Russia is not dictating the tempo of this conflict. They are reacting to it. As reports continued coming in throughout the week, we learned more about the scale of the intelligence breach. CIA officers carried out verification protocols across 4 European stations, forcing the relocation of suspected Russian assets. MI6 targeted communication networks that had been dormant since the invasion's early months. German intelligence operating in the Baltic reportedly intercepted Russian damage control transmissions used by Moscow to assess the breach. This wasn't just a defection. This wasn't just a leak. This was strategic exposure. This was operational devastation, and operational security is the one thing Putin has struggled to maintain since this war began. For every advance Russia has made, their internal vulnerabilities have created setbacks that undermine long-term planning. Remember, Putin thought his generals were loyal beyond question. He thought fear alone would prevent betrayal. He thought his inner circle was impenetrable. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. His generals are questioning his judgment. His officers are calculating their own survival. His inner circle is leaking from within. What makes this moment so critical and so volatile is that this defection happened at a time when Putin is under unprecedented internal pressure. The hardliners want faster escalation. Oligarchs want economic relief. Military commanders want resources they're not receiving. The Russian public wants an end to a war they were promised would last weeks. Putin is balancing these demands while losing control of his own intelligence apparatus. And when leaders in that position suffer public humiliation, they don't respond with caution. They respond with aggression. They respond from desperation. NATO's official statement, now circulating across global media, was designed to signal that the alliance will not allow Putin to regain strategic initiative. Officials said plainly that Russia's war planning was incompatible with European security. That is diplomatic language for, we know everything, and we're ready. You don't usually hear that confidence from NATO unless something fundamental has shifted. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his military commanders in a brief but pointed statement tonight. He said, "Our allies see what we have always known." He said, Russia's strength is a performance, their weakness is reality. And he said, every day more of them realize they are fighting for a lie. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how significant this moment has become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. The defection wasn't isolated, along with the general's escape. 2 additional military officials reportedly sought contact with Western agencies. Russian counterintelligence launched emergency audits across 3 command structures. Kremlin security increased surveillance on senior officers to levels not seen since Stalin. All of this happened within the same week. When Putin's apparatus moves this frantically, it means the damage is deeper than they're admitting. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin will accelerate offensive operations before more intelligence leaks. Another is that he will purge his command structure, further destabilizing military effectiveness. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Putin will resort to escalatory measures to reassert dominance. But this week, NATO took preparation seriously. They didn't wait for confirmation. They didn't delay for political consensus. They didn't hope for the best. They acted. What we're watching now is a test of resilience. Putin wants to see if NATO's unity will crack. NATO wants to show their coordination is unbreakable. Ukraine wants to prove they remain capable of victory, and the world wants to prevent this conflict from spiraling further. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Russian command communications in real time. They say panic is spreading through the senior ranks. They say operational plans are being rewritten daily. And they say Putin's decision to trust so few people is now his greatest vulnerability. But NATO is not celebrating prematurely. In fact, NATO is preparing for retaliation. Their response this week, swift, coordinated and decisive, sent a message to Putin that his secrets are no longer safe. And it sent a message to the world that this alliance remains formidable. As the coming weeks unfold, we expect more details to emerge about exactly what those 34 battle plans contained. But what we do know is that NATO's rapid response was decisive. It prevented potential offensives, it exposed Russian vulnerabilities, and it reminded Putin that betrayal can come from within. What happens next will depend on what the Kremlin does in the coming days. If they retreat and reassess, this moment will be remembered as a turning point. If they escalate, NATO has already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are ready to respond, and tonight, for the first time in years, Vladimir Putin appears to be genuinely uncertain. Under the Kremlin is quiet, too quiet, and when Putin is quiet, it means he is calculating. It means he is choosing his next move carefully, because tonight, Putin learned something he has refused to accept. His generals can be turned. His plans can be exposed, and his empire of fear has cracks that are spreading. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. The walls around Putin are closing in. His strategy is no longer secret, and the world is watching every move he makes. And we will be here, covering every detail as the next phase unfolds.